Just because everybody is asking me in terms of the January 19th start date, is that when practices would start, or is that when games would start and practices would be earlier?
The January 19th start date is for practices. So practices would begin on that date, and then our bylaws give a 10-day requirement of practices before game competitions can begin.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Someone else?
One question, I guess, about why the choice of January 19th. Was there a specific date or reason for that date?
The conversation with the board was really centered around the number of schools that we're seeing go to distance learning, and we're starting to see more and more schools lean towards that January 19th date as a return. A couple reasons for that. I think primarily when you look at the dates of when New Year's falls this year, January 4th would be the first Monday after New Year's. So if you follow the 2-week standard that has been, I think, pretty standard for looking at COVID data, then 2 weeks after that would bring you to January 19th on a school calendar.
Next question. All set?
Glenn,
Go ahead.
what's the feedback been like from athletic directors in the schools as you kind of get this process going in terms of, obviously a lot of them are starting to look towards distance learning. What's been the feedback from these schools as you're starting to make these plans for winter sports in terms of, how do they manage distance learning and bringing sports back?
Yeah, good question, Sean. So we did survey our member schools to try to understand kind of what they were thinking moving into this. And one of the questions we asked, I'm just looking at some of the data on my other screen here, but one of the questions we did ask is whether a school would continue with CIAC practices and competitions if their school moved to full distance learning due to staffing issues. Because we're seeing that as well. There's decisions that are being made to move to distance learning because of positive COVID results, but there's also decisions being made because of inability to staff schools due to people being quarantined. So with that, 44.2% of those who responded indicated that they would continue to both practice and play CIAC games. 14.7% responded that they would allow CIAC practices to continue, but they would not play games if they went to that full distance learning model. And 41.1% indicated they would suspend CIAC athletics if instruction was moved to full distance learning for any reason. So again, with the responses that we had, we were looking at about 40% of our membership that if they move to a full distance model, anytime between now and the first of the year, that they would not continue with either practices or games for athletics.
If people want to put, the hand up and the reactions, we can do it that way, or just someone jump right in.
Will this decision to not start, I guess, until January, will this at all impact, do you think, the second alternative season, which football is in right now?
Yeah, so now that we've established January 19th is the start date, the next step for us will be working to look at the calendar to identify what the end dates and tournament dates will be. And at this point, we're looking primarily at all of the winter and spring sports, and then football that didn't get played in the fall. So we're going to keep all those in consideration and look at the calendar in the next couple of weeks to determine the best place to play those.
Glenn, in October, you had mentioned that you were having problems with winter sports venues, especially in terms of like colleges not allowing you to use field houses and indoor track and that kind of thing. Do you anticipate that being different in January? And is there going to be different plans for high-risk sports like wrestling than low-risk, more medium-risk sports like basketball?
Yeah, I think that's a good rationale also for part of moving to January 19th for all sports is the DPH guidelines and the sector rules in place right now that suspend those high-risk sports exist for the rest of the calendar year. So we'll have conversations with the Department of Health and the governor's office, continue to collaborate with them. They continue to be very good partners with us to understand if those restrictions will be moving forward past the first of the year as we get closer. So that'll be of assistance, getting past January to understand high-risk sports and what we can do with those. The same thing with colleges and universities. We do know a lot of our colleges and universities are sending kids home for the Thanksgiving, break, and then they're not coming back. So looking at the start of the second semester for colleges and universities to see if things are any different from a COVID climate at that point, and whether there would be more willingness or that opportunity would exist to have, outside events from the colleges and universities come back onto campus.
As of right now, are all sports slated to have practice potentially beginning on January 19th, or are there some sports that might be singled out to be canceled for the season?
Right now, all winter sports are scheduled to begin on January 19th. I saw, Jerry, you had your hand up a couple times.
Glenn, I know some of the committees came up with some alternative suggestions so they could have some of their sports, such as wrestling. Are there any decisions on some of the things that would be done to ensure that sports could be held? I had read that, there was talk about masks in basketball. Any decisions been made on things that sports will have to do if they want to play this winter after the 19th?
Yes, Jerry, extensive work was done on considering mitigating strategies to be able to play those sports. So the mitigating strategies that we presented, as well as some other discussions that we had with the State Medical Society Sports Medicine Committee, which services CIAC as a sports medicine advisory committee. The Sports Medicine Advisory Committee did approve the mitigating strategies for the sports at their past meeting. So the strategies that we were bringing forward, at least at this time and moving forward, would be sufficient for those sports that we can continue with. But as you know, the not playing the high-risk sports is in alignment with DPH and sector rules right now as well. So a sport like wrestling that's high risk, we need to understand when we get back in January where the various categories are in terms of being allowed to continue. Will high-risk sports be allowed to go? Moderate indoor risk sports, we'll have to, again, see what DPH and the governor's office feels on those as we get to the first of the year.
Could you share some of the mitigating strategies for wrestling, later in an email or something like that? Some of the things that you guys presented to the DPH?
Yeah, we didn't present anything specifically to DPH on the mitigating strategies. We reviewed that with the State Medical Society Sports Medicine Committee. But, at this point, we'll wait to see, where the high-risk categories lie with that, because it could change if things change between now and then. So, we, at this point, we'll just, kind of keep those internally right now, keep adjusting them as need be as we get to January 19th. And then, probably shortly before that, we'll release out, as we do to our ADs, about what the strategies will be and they have to put in place.
Thank you.
A few weeks of football you have planned for, I guess, February and March. How does this further squeeze that or no?
No, Dave, we're, again, at this point, we're looking at the sports that we have left. And right now it's the focus is for that high school season for winter sports to begin on January 19th. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll look at the calendar for all sports that we have left to be played and make sure those fit into the seasons with a January 19th start for winter sports.
Can you characterize what the DPH has been telling you? They've been telling us on the governor's call that things will be pretty bleak over the next few months. We'll start to improve after that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for DPH again. They've been great partners, and they're open to communication. So
the cards
I
are
think
going through
DPH can probably answer that from their end. So I'll answer it just from CIAC's end. The medical professionals that we're speaking with and the epidemiologists we've had opportunities to speak with, I think are right in line with what DPH has shared, that in the tri-state area, we can expect numbers to continue to increase over the next couple months. And then, hopefully after the first of the year and mid-January or so, we may see that start to go down a little bit, and then we can get back to play at this point. Again, we understand at this point that the DPH has not prohibited the indoor moderate risk sports from playing at this point. There are still sports being played in Connecticut at this point, but from CIAC interscholastic perspective, again, as an education-based experience, we need to look at in-person learning and the impact that rising numbers have had on our schools staying in session. And so that, separates us a little bit from how DPH may work with youth and amateur sports outside of interscholastic athletics.
Glenn, can you clarify when sports resume on January 19th? Do you anticipate the mitigating factors such as masks will still be in place, or is that still to be determined for the moderate sports, basketball, hockey, that kind of thing?
Yeah, Patrick, it's still to be determined, because the recommendation right now is for the remainder of the year till January 1st. So we'll continue to stay in close contact with the governor's office and DPH and see if that recommended requirement continues at that point.
Did any, I wouldn't say late information come in that made you guys go to this decision, or do you think this was just a steady upclimb of positivity rate of COVID cases?
Yeah, it was no late information. I mean, there was nothing that, came in last night that was, the tipping point of anything. I think, it was just continual conversations. They were great collaboration with the State Medical Society Sports Med Committee and the doctors there. It was continued discussions with school districts and looking at the impact that this has had on individual districts in the community, and then trying to anticipate how this was going to impact districts as we move forward. So, as it was shared by somebody else earlier, the outlook isn't great in the next couple months, and so when you put all those factors together, we want our kids to be in classrooms for instruction as much as possible. We want our communities to be safe, and the board felt that this was a decision that gave clear direction and also kept the safety of our school communities at the forefront.
Glenn, you talked about the numbers, right? Everybody says the numbers. Can you just specifically, I mean, what does that mean? Is that you're just talking about the positive cases? Is that the numbers that we're talking about?
Yeah, so numbers incorporates the number of positivity rate that we're seeing in Connecticut right now, the number of schools that are needing to quarantine for COVID reasons, the number of schools that for staffing reasons are needing to go to a distance learning model at this point. So, when we talk about numbers, it's a variety of different things, but yes, the COVID metrics in Connecticut plays into that as well.
That the January 19th date, it's 2 months from now. I mean, we're kind of going to be living in, who knows? I mean, we could be living in a completely different world in 2 months. Does today's news, are you hopeful? I mean, what's your message to student athletes and, athletic departments in general about the January 19th start date?
Yeah, I think the January 19th date is a very optimistic date from schools in general. I think even schools that are moving to distance learning, you're seeing January 19th as a date that most of those schools are anticipating returning at that time. So that 2-week period following the first of the year seems to be a date that others believe is a optimistic and realistic time frame that we could return with good curriculum instruction, at least in a hybrid model. And we're hopeful and believe that at that point we'll be able to at least return to get our winter sports started at that point. Hopefully all of them, but we'll have to see what happens with the high risk category sports as we move through the winter.
Thank you.
Any other questions, guys and ladies?
Yes, what about non-sport specific conditioning? Is the CIAC sanctioning that continuing?
Yeah, so out of season conditioning may continue as long as the school administration approves it at each of the local schools. So, at this point, we would be out of season. We'll be out of season until January 19th. So any of the out of season conditioning that would normally occur may continue with the caveat that the school administration allows that activity to continue.
Anyone else? We do have time if you're interested. Again, we'll post this recording on YouTube for the next hour or so.
Yeah, Glenn, this is Jerry. You might have touched on this before. If you start a winter season on the 19th, you have 2 weeks for practice or something like that. Do you anticipate at this time the schedule might be adjusted because you would have a very short season, since most of them usually end in normal years in early March?
Yeah, Jerry, over the next couple of weeks, we'll be putting together what some anticipated end dates and tournament dates will be for that. But at this point, we wanted to give our member schools and athletic directors at least a start date for that for planning purposes. We felt that was important. And then we'll work through Thanksgiving here to create those end dates and tournament dates.
Glenn, you sort of touched on it when you talked about, obviously the DPH hasn't outright, banned or suspended moderate risk indoor sports. But what was the most recent conversations with the state, with the DPH in terms of your guys' plans? Did they have any input on, kind of postponing everything for a few weeks, or is this strictly just based off of what you and the board heard from your member schools?
It's primarily based off of the information from the member schools and the discussion amongst the principals, which are the voting members of the board today. The last conversation that we had with DPH in the governor's office was the day that DPH released their updated guidelines. So again, we were in communication with the governor's office through Paul Mounds and with Commissioner Gifford up to that point. And then once we had their guidance from that point on, it was review with the State Medical Society and then input from our school membership.
Glenn, a few people would say, put us out of our misery. Let's get this over with. What makes you think that January 19th would be okay? And what do you say to those people who say, we've had enough?
Those are probably the same people who said that we should have done the same thing in the fall. And, in the fall, we did have 30,000 athletes complete a full season. And, many of our leagues did an outstanding job getting those tournaments in. I think a lot of those people probably weren't very optimistic that we would have gotten to this point in the fall, but we're able to provide really exceptional opportunities for kids. And a number of you did a great job covering particularly the seniors, but just a lot of the athletes and the exceptional experiences that they had there. We did collect some data on that as well, and our data showed a very, very low impact from at least the fall moderate risk and low risk activities from a COVID standpoint. So, our strategies and mitigating strategies, I do think were effective, and we did provide a great experience for about 30,000 kids in the fall. We have that same goal and anticipation as we come in on January 19th. We think is a reasonable date where we can understand where we are in terms of getting through the holidays and how our schools are impacted over the next couple months. But again, January 19th is a optimistic date for I think most of us in the school community that we can be back to instruction and some level of sports with mitigating strategies at that point.
Thanks, Glenn.
Hey, Glenn, can you explain what kind of data, I mean, or who collected the data? And can you give me a little more specific on, what type of data you guys collected and where?
Yep. We worked with our member schools to try and understand how many kids were quarantined or teams quarantined over the course of the fall. How many, if any, cases came back to show that sport was the source of transmission for that, and collected data to see if how many coaches were impacted. So it was general data. There was nothing that was identifiable or really student specific in it. We collected data from 133 of our 186 member schools had responded to the information. And so, through that, I think one of the important pieces, we saw with that, we played about 7,800 contests in all sports, all levels throughout the fall season. And, if you conservatively estimate that there were 4 practices for every game that was played, at least 2 practices by each team that was allowed in those games, then that would give you about 31,000 events, a little more than 31,000 events that would include games and practices in the fall season. And through the data collection with our member schools, we saw a total of 7 positive cases that through local DPH tracing led back to CIAC or school sanctioned sports or practices. So you're looking at a 0.022% transmission rate in that. So again, I think our strategies and the work of our athletic directors, the adherence of our coaches and our athletes was exceptional. We're very proud and happy that we were able to give that experience to, again, approximately 30,000 kids this fall.
Talking to parents and students, and given the protests of last spring and this fall, do you think most are starting to get it, the necessity of doing all this?
I think there's a lot of probably fatigue around COVID at this point, Dave. And I do think people understand the seriousness of COVID, but I think there's also, a lot of stress and anxiety to try to get as much of a normal experience as we can, especially for our kids. I think through that experiences last year and even through the fall, you're always concerned about the kids that lose opportunities. And so you never want to take opportunities for kids. So I do think, at least in Connecticut, that, listen, in Connecticut, the numbers are still better than a lot of places in the country. And I think the people in Connecticut do take it serious and understand it. But we also understand and respect that everybody wants to give their kid the best experience that we can. And again, that's why, partially why here we're looking and saying January 19th is the date that we can do that with some certainty. And so that's what we're looking forward to.
Any last questions?
Yes. What would it take for you? What would have to happen in order for you to rethink that January 19th date? What would be kind of a tipping point to possibly move it back?
We'll continue to evaluate as we work through. We'll continue to have conversations with Governor Lamont's office and with DPH, with the State Medical Society Sports Medicine Committee, and our membership as we move forward. But right now, this is the date that, again, we see within our school communities as the appropriate date to be optimistic for that return and to get things started. So our process moving forward will be the same that it's been, and we're going to use the collaboration of our state leaders and medical experts as we move forward.
Glenn, Kevin from the Waterbury Republican. With the numbers, with the percentages you put out for distance learning, how many of the schools were involved in that? Like, how many gave you feedback?
Give me 1 second, I'll tell you exactly. We had 90 95 responses to the survey, and then I had another handful that were emailed directly to me. So I'd say, we were right between like 95 and 100 responses from that.
Awesome. Thank you, Glenn.